Red Butte lay at the edge of nowhere, where the desert met the bones of the mountains, and the wind never stopped whispering through dry grass. The town was built on sweat, iron, and a kind of stubborn hope that refused to die, even when the land gave nothing back. Its single street was lined with sun-faded buildings, a general store that smelled of kerosene and flour, a saloon with creaking doors, a half-empty livery, and at the center, where the heart of Red Butte beat loudest, a blacksmith's forge. From dawn to dusk, the rhythm of hammer and anvil carried through the town, like a song that refused to fade. Each strike echoed the name of the man behind it, Elias Boone, the giant blacksmith. He stood 6.5 feet tall, built like the cliffs that rose beyond town, every motion slow and deliberate, as though even time hesitated to rush him. His skin was darkened by sun and fire, his beard black as coal, his eyes steady beneath the heavy brow. Elias was not a man of talk. He measured his words like he measured his iron, carefully, only when needed. Folks said he'd once fought in the war, though no one knew which side, or if it was even true. Whatever he'd seen, it had carved a deep quiet into him. He never raised his voice, never boasted, never drank. But when he worked with a kind of grace that made even the hardest men pause to watch. He fixed everything from wagon axles to church bells, never asking more than a man could spare. When someone thanked him, he only nodded once, his deep voice rumbling. Iron don't shape itself. His forge stood like a fortress of flame against the dust, and beside it lived the only person who could melt the iron in his soul, Clara Boone. She was small beside him, her hands delicate where his were scarred and rough, her eyes were the color of creek water in spring, bright and full of life. Clara taught the town's children beneath the cottonwood near the forge, her voice drifting through the air in soft rhythm with the sound of Elias's hammer. She taught them letters and numbers, but more than that, she taught them kindness, the one thing Red Butte seemed to be running out of. When the days were long and the sun harsh, she'd bring her husband a cup of cool water, brushing the sweat from his temple with her sleeve. He would pause only long enough to look at her, a glance that carried more love than any words could hold. "Don't work yourself to dust," she'd say, half smiling. He'd give a small grunt of amusement, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Ain't no other way to live, darlin'." Sometimes, after the day's work, she'd sit by the forge while he cooled his tools, humming old hymns. The glow of the fire would paint her face gold, her hair catching sparks of light. Elias would watch her in silence, a quiet reverence in his eyes, like a man who'd been blessed beyond what he deserved. But even peace in Red Butte carried the smell of danger. The mines west of town had dried up that spring, leaving dozens of men with empty pockets and quick tempers. The saloon filled earlier, the streets emptied sooner, and whispers of trouble began to spread, whispers with a name. The Ryker boys. There were 5 in number, all dust and whiskey and mean eyes. Their leader, Tom Ryker, had drifted in from the border country with a scar along his jaw and a smile that made dogs growl. He was the kind of man who talked smooth and shot straighter, the kind who'd rather take from the weak than earn from the strong. At first, it was just talk, men missing $1, a wagon will loosened overnight, a warning carved into a door. But before long, protection money became their trade. Storekeepers, ranchers, even the saloon owner paid them to keep their places from burning. Most folks bowed their heads and paid, all except Elias Boone. When Ryker came to the forge that first time, the morning was hot enough to make the air shimmer. Elias was at his anvil, shaping a plow blade, his hammer rising and falling like a heartbeat. Sparks flew. The Ryker boys stood at the doorway, blocking the light. "Fine piece of working you got here," Ryker said, stepping inside. "Town like this don't see craftsmanship too often." Elias didn't look up. "Don't need your compliments, mister." Ryker grinned. "Not a compliment. A business offer. You see, my boys and I are helping Red Butte stay safe. Hard country out here. Lots of bad folk riding through. For $1 a week, we make sure nothing happens to good people like you." Elias lifted the plow blade with tongs and plunged it into the trough. Steam hissed up between them. He didn't speak until the water went still again. "Ain't no bad folk gonna find trouble here, unless they come looking." Ryker's grin faded a little. "You calling me trouble?" Elias finally met his gaze. "I'm saying I don't pay thieves." The forge went quiet, except for the faint crackle of fire. The other men shifted on their boots, their hands brushing the handles of their guns. Ryker's eyes narrowed, but there was amusement there too, a kind of dark curiosity. "You got a pretty wife, Boone," he said, voice low. "Be a shame if harm found its way to her schoolhouse." The hammer in Elias's hand froze midair. The heat that rolled from the forge wasn't half as fierce as what burned behind his eyes. He turned fully now, towering over Ryker, shadows rippling across his face. "You speak her name again," he said quietly, "and you'll find out how fast iron breaks bone." For a moment, it looked as if the outlaw might draw, but Ryker only smirked, brushing the dust from his coat. "You've got grit, Blacksmith. I like that. Makes the story better when grit turns to ashes." He tipped his hat and turned, his boots crunching slow against the dirt floor. The others followed him out, one glancing back nervously as they disappeared into the glare of the street. Clara appeared a moment later, her face pale, a schoolbook clutched against her chest. "Elias," she whispered, "please, don't provoke them." "I didn't," he said, setting the hammer down. "They came here." Her voice trembled. "Then promise me, don't go looking for them. Promise me, you'll keep to your work." He turned to her, gentler now, brushing her cheek with his soot-stained thumb. "My work's all I've got, Clara. You know that." She took his hand, pressing it against her heart. "No," she said softly. "You've got more than that." For a moment, the forge seemed to breathe with them, the fire dimming, the wind outside softening its song. Elias looked into her eyes and saw everything he'd never thought he'd deserve: warmth, forgiveness, home. That night, Red Butte slept under a restless moon. The forge burned late, its orange light flickering across the street. People passing by heard the hammer ringing, slow, steady, deliberate. Some said it sounded like a warning, others like a prayer. Out beyond the edge of town, 5 riders camped near the dry creek. The firelight danced across their faces as they laughed and drank, but Ryker wasn't laughing. He sat apart, sharpening his knife, his face lit by the glow of the blade. One of his men asked, "Boss, what's the plan for the blacksmith?" Ryker smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ain't in a hurry," he said. "Man like that needs time to believe he's safe. Then, when he lets down his guard—" He held the knife to the fire until it gleamed red. "That's when it hurts the most." The next morning, the town awoke to calm skies and the smell of iron once more. Elias was already working, bare arms shining with sweat, hammering peace back into the world. The sun bled across the horizon, melting into the red dust that gave Red Butte its name. The air was so dry that each breath felt like swallowing heat. Elias Boone wiped the sweat from his brow, loading the heavy anvil onto his wagon. A nearby rancher had been waiting a week for it, and though the hour was late, Elias had promised it'd be delivered by sundown. He never broke his word, not to another man, and certainly not to himself. Clara stood at the doorway of the forge, the glow of the fire behind her turning her hair into strands of gold. She had flour on her hands from baking, her face flushed with the kind of soft worry she never voiced aloud. "It's near dark," she said quietly. "Can't it wait till morning?" Elias tightened the straps around the anvil. "Promise them today. They're starting the new pen tomorrow." "You always keep your promises," she said, half smiling, though her fingers twisted in her apron. "Just don't keep the night waiting too long." He looked at her, his expression softening. "Be back before moonrise. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Clara nodded. He stepped closer, his massive hands cupping her face gently, the heat of his skin smelling faintly of soot and iron. For a man who could bend steel, his touch was tender. "You worry too much," he said. She smiled faintly. "And you not enough." He kissed her forehead, climbed into the wagon, and with a flick of the reins, rolled out toward the open plain. The wind rose behind him, whispering through the cottonwood leaves, carrying with it a sense of something unseen. By the time the sun fell, Red Butte had grown quiet. The saloon lamps flickered, the preacher's dog barked once, then went silent. Clara closed up the forge and drew the curtains. She set out a small supper, bread, stew, and a single candle flickering weakly against the dusk. The hammer that had sung all day now rested on the anvil, cooling in silence. That was when the laughter came, low, harsh, and wrong. 5 shadows stumbled down the street, their voices carrying like the calls of coyotes. The Ryker boys had been drinking since noon, their pockets full of other men's coin, their courage soaked in whiskey. Tom Ryker led them, his hat tilted, his eyes sharp even in his drunken sway. When he saw the faint light inside the forge, his grin widened. "Well, boys," he drawled, "looks like the giant left his doll all alone." They pushed open the door before she could bolt it. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The smell of liquor and sweat filled the room. Ryker tipped his hat mockingly. "Evening, Mrs. Boone. Your husband home?" Her voice wavered but didn't break. "You need to leave. Now." Ryker chuckled. "Now that's no way to greet company. We just came by to say howdy. Ain't that right, fellas?" The others laughed, their boots scuffing the floor, eyes glinting like animals. Clara took a step back toward the hearth. Her hands trembled, but she stood her ground. "Get out," she said again, "before he comes back." "Now, that's the thing," Ryker said, leaning against the workbench. "Your man's a big one. Strong, sure, but he ain't here, is he?" He reached for her chin, and she slapped his hand away. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ryker's expression turned dark. He nodded to the others. "Teach her some manners." She tried to run, but they were on her too fast. A chair splintered, a scream cut through the air, and the lamp shattered, spilling fire and smoke. Outside, the town heard it. Curtains fluttered, whispers rose, but no one came. Red Butte watched through its shutters and did nothing. When the door finally swung open again, the laughter was gone. The 5 men walked into the street, the dust swallowing their footsteps. Tom Ryker lingered last, glancing back once. The forge behind him was dark, the smell of blood faint but unmistakable. He spat into the dirt, adjusted his hat, and muttered, "Now the hammer's quiet." Then he rode off into the night. The town slept uneasy. When dawn came, Elias's wagon rolled slowly into Red Butte, the mules dragging their hooves through the powdery dust. He'd spent the night on the trail, under a sky so wide it made a man feel like nothing but a breath in God's wind. As he neared home, he noticed the silence first. No clang of metal, no morning chatter, no sound from the schoolyard where Clara taught. His boots hit the ground before the wagon stopped. The forge door stood open, swaying gently. A dread unlike anything he'd ever known crawled up his spine. Inside, the air was cold, the fire long dead. The floor was streaked with blood and soot. A broken chair lay on its side, a lock of Clara's hair caught beneath it. His breath left him in a shudder. He turned slowly, his eyes catching something near the anvil, a single boot print, pressed deep into the crimson-stained dust. He dropped to his knees beside it, his massive hands trembling as they traced the mark. Then his eyes found her. She lay near the doorway, her dress torn, her hands stretched toward the cold hearth. Her face was peaceful now, as though the pain had already drifted somewhere beyond his reach. Elias didn't make a sound. Not at first. He just sank to the floor, his head bowed, his body shaking as though the world had struck him with its full weight. Then a sound broke from him, not a scream, not a cry, but something deeper, something that seemed torn from the earth itself. He carried her to the river, where the cottonwoods grew tall and the wind whispered through the leaves. It was the only place in Red Butte that still felt alive. He dug with his hands, the soil dark and heavy. He laid her down carefully, brushed the dust from her cheek, and whispered her name until the word lost meaning. When the grave was filled, he sat beside it until the light began to fade, the river glinting red in the sunset. A single hammer lay in his lap, its head still smeared with soot. He didn't move. He barely breathed. The townsfolk watched from afar, guilt gnawing their hearts, but fear keeping their feet still. Not one of them dared to speak to him. They closed their doors early, whispering prayers they didn't believe would reach him. As night fell, a cold wind swept through Red Butte. The forge stood silent, the fire unlit for the first time in years. The hammer that had sung for the town, building their lives, fixing their wagons, forging their peace, was quiet now. The silence felt like a wound. Elias returned to the forge once, just before midnight. He stood in the doorway, looking at the ashes. The air smelled of blood and smoke and failure. On the anvil, a few drops of dried crimson glimmered faintly in the moonlight. He set his hammer down beside them. The sound was soft but final, like the closing of a coffin. He stayed there for hours, motionless, staring into the dead coals. Somewhere in the stillness, he spoke. Not to God, not to the town, but to her. His words were low, almost lost to the wind. "They'll pay, Clara. I promise you. Every one of them." When he finally stepped outside, the moon had climbed high above the hills. Its pale light spilled across the dirt street, glinting on the broken horseshoe lying near the trough, a gift Ryker had once mocked. Elias picked it up, turning it in his hand. His eyes hardened. By dawn, the forge was dark again, the door shut tight. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. The hammer lay untouched, the anvil cold as stone. For 2 days, the blacksmith of Red Butte vanished into the wild. His forge stayed dark, his mules untethered, his tools cold and untouched. The town spoke of it in whispers, as if their breath might summon him back. Some said he'd ridden east, chasing the Ryker boys across the mesas. Others swore they saw him walking into the desert alone. No horse, no hat, no water, just a shadow swallowed by the horizon. Whatever the truth, the people of Red Butte avoided the forge at night, afraid the ghosts there might still be watching. On the 3rd evening, smoke rose again from the chimney. Slow and thick, it climbed into the copper sky like an omen. A boy delivering mail was the first to see him. Elias Boone stood shirtless before the fire, his arms black with soot and scars, the muscles in his back flexing with every swing of the hammer. But it wasn't the kind of hammer used for fixing wagon wheels or shaping plowshares. The shape was wrong, too heavy, too broad, the handle reinforced with iron bands. Every strike echoed through the valley like thunder breaking loose. Sparks leapt from the anvil, painting his face in streaks of orange light. And there, along the side of the weapon, letters were being carved into the steel. One name, deep and precise. Clara. By morning, the rumor had reached every saloon, every ranch, every campfire for 50 miles. The giant blacksmith was forging vengeance. The hammer of Red Butte had risen. No one saw him leave that night, but before dawn the dogs began to bark. In the east quarter, beyond the freight station, there was a sound like a man's scream swallowed by the wind. When they found him, the first of the Ryker boys was sprawled on the gambling tent floor, his hand crushed beyond recognition, his pistol bent like tin. The dealer said he hadn't heard a word, just the flap of canvas, the glint of metal, and then silence. The hammer was gone, but the market left in the dirt was the size of a man's heart. That was the beginning. The second was found by the riverbank, face down in the mud, his ribs broken, his revolver untouched. No one had heard a gunshot. His boots were missing. Some said Elias took them as a sign, the way a smith takes a nail from a coffin, to remember the man he buried. By the 3rd night, every outlaw between Red Butte and Dry Hollow was looking over his shoulder. Campfires burned low. Horses spooked at shadows. The stories grew with each telling. Some said the blacksmith didn't sleep, that his hammer never cooled, that he walked barefoot through the desert with fire still burning in his chest. Others claimed he spoke to the dead, that Clara's voice guided him through the dark. The sheriff tried to keep order, but the town was already slipping into myth. He rode out once, hoping to find Elias before the killing went too far. He found only tracks, large, deliberate prints leading into the canyon. He followed them until dusk, when he came upon a shape at the edge of a cliff, a man kneeling beside a dying fire. "Elias," the sheriff called, keeping his voice low. "You can't go on like this." The blacksmith didn't turn. The wind caught his hair, his skin streaked with blood and soot. "There's law for this," the sheriff said, though even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. "You bring him in, they'll hang. But it has to be law, not vengeance." Elias finally looked up. His eyes caught the lantern light, cold, steady, empty of mercy. "Law." His voice was a rasp of stone on stone. "Where was your law when they touched her?" The sheriff had no answer. He sat his horse for a long moment, then tipped his hat. "Ain't my place to stand between a man and his God," he said, and rode away. By the time the fourth Ryker boy was found, people stopped pretending it was justice. They called it reckoning. He was discovered hanging from the rafters of the old barn outside town, a horseshoe nailed to the beam above his head, the same kind Elias had once forged, the same kind Ryker had mocked. No one dared cut him down until sunrise. That night, a dust storm rolled in from the desert, cloaking Red Butte in the color of rust. The wind howled like the sound of a distant forge, and through it, the people swore they heard the ringing of iron. Children hid under their beds. Men sat awake with rifles across their knees, praying they weren't next. When dawn came, the storm had passed, but the streets bore footprints too large for any ordinary man, each print blackened, as if scorched by heat. Only one name remained, Tom Ryker. He'd holed up in the silver mine north of town, the same place where his gang once had stolen horses. It was said the tunnels went for miles, twisting through the mountain like veins of darkness. By then, Ryker wasn't sleeping. He sat in the cold glow of a lantern, hand shaking, pistol always within reach. His men were gone, his whiskey gone, his laughter gone. He told himself Boone wouldn't find him here. The mine was deep, hidden, cursed by cave-ins. But when the wind outside shifted, carrying that faint, metallic ring, he felt it in his bones. The sound was slow, deliberate, like a hammer falling against something hard, again and again. In town, a drifter rode in from the east and told the story that would become legend. He'd seen Boone on the trail, riding a black horse with no saddle, his hammer strapped to his back, his coat flapping like the wings of a crow. His face was streaked with dust and blood, his eyes hollow. The man swore he saw the name Clara glinting in the moonlight, carved into the steel like a prayer or a curse. No one doubted him. Elias reached the outskirts of the mine as night fell. The world was silent except for the cry of coyotes in the distance. His lantern flickered in the wind, casting long shadows across the rocks. Each step echoed through the canyon, slow and certain. Near the entrance, he stopped. In the dirt, a trail of footprints led inside. Ryker's boots, dragging slightly on the right. Elias knelt beside them, pressing his fingers into the ground. The soil was still warm. He rose, the hammer heavy in his hand, the lantern swaying like a captured soul. For a moment, he closed his eyes. The desert wind carried her voice, soft, faint, remembered. "Don't let them change you." He whispered back, "They already did." The mine breathed cold air against his face, smelling of silver and rot. Darkness swallowed the light in seconds, but he stepped forward anyway. The lantern swayed, painting gold arcs across the walls. The hammer gleamed, the name etched on its side catching the glow, Clara. Somewhere deep inside, a voice echoed, a low laugh, nervous and brittle. "That you, Boone?" Elias didn't answer. His footsteps were slow, steady, relentless. The laugh turned to breathing, ragged and shallow. "I didn't mean for it to go that way," Ryker called out. "You hear me? It wasn't supposed to happen." His words bounced off the stone, growing smaller with every echo. "You think this'll bring her back? You think killing me changes a damn thing?" The sound of boots scuffing against rock came next, closer, heavier. Ryker raised his pistol, hand shaking. "Stay back. I swear to God." From the dark came a voice like distant thunder. "You already met God." The hammer struck stone somewhere ahead, a metallic roar that shook dust from the ceiling. Ryker fired blindly, the muzzle flash lighting the tunnel for an instant, enough to see the blacksmith's shape, larger than life, eyes burning behind the lantern glow. The gun clicked empty. Ryker stumbled backward, tripping over loose rock, his lantern crashing to the ground and shattering. Darkness swallowed everything. The tunnels breathed like a living thing, each exhale cold and damp, each inhalation carrying the scent of rot and gunpowder. The silver seams in the walls glimmered faintly in the light of Elias Boone's lantern, like veins pulsing with a ghost's heartbeat. His boots echoed softly on the rock. Every step was measured, patient, deliberate. The air was heavy with the stench of fear and whiskey. Somewhere ahead, A bottle clattered against stone. Then came a laugh, low and broken. "That you, Boone? You come to dig with the dead?" Elias said nothing. The glow of his lantern swayed, and in its trembling light, the edges of the hammer caught a dull gleam. The name carved into its steel, Clara, flashed once, then vanished into shadow. Tom Ryker stumbled into view, his face half hidden in the flicker of a dying torch wedged between two rocks. His hat was gone, his eyes red from drink and sleeplessness. He swayed as he raised his pistol, though the barrel wavered like a snake that had lost its strike. "Well, I'll be damned," Ryker rasped. "The blacksmith come to bury himself. Ain't you tired yet, Boone? Ain't you had enough ghosts?" Elias's voice was low, like distant thunder rolling over the desert. "You're the only ghost left." Ryker grinned, baring teeth the color of tobacco. "Still talking like a preacher. You think that hammer of yours can wash her blood off you? You think killing me's gonna make her smile again?" The blacksmith's jaw tightened. "You don't get to say her name." "Oh, I'll say it," Ryker said, taking a swig from the bottle and wiping his mouth. "Clara. Little Clara Boone. Thought she was too good for this town. Thought love could save her. But she was weak, Boone, just like every fool who thinks they can change what this land does to people." Elias took another step forward, his face now lit in full. His eyes burned, not with rage, but something deeper, colder. She was stronger than every coward who watched. Ryker laughed, the sound echoing like madness through the mine. "You think I'm scared of you? You think I ain't seen men like you before? Big hands, small brains. You're not God, Boone. You're just another killer in the dirt." Elias raised the hammer. The light from the lantern caught the edges of the steel. "No," he said quietly. "I'm judgment." Ryker's hand twitched. The pistol came up fast. The blast was deafening in the narrow space. The bullet struck Elias in the shoulder, spinning him slightly, but he didn't fall. Blood bloomed through his shirt, hot and dark. He took another step. "Stay back." Ryker shouted, firing again. The second shot hit lower, in the ribs. Elias staggered, breath catching, but his eyes never left Ryker's. The hammer trembled in his grip, not from weakness, but from the weight of what it carried. "You should have run," Elias said. His voice cracked, but it carried through the stone like a prophecy. Ryker pulled the trigger a third time, click. Empty. His eyes widened, disbelief twisting his face. "You ain't human," he whispered. Elias stepped closer, each breath labored, the lantern behind him painting his silhouette against the wall like some mythic figure torn from fire. "No," he said. "Not anymore." He swung. The hammer came down with the force of 10 lifetimes worth of grief. The sound wasn't a strike, it was an eruption. Rock split. Wood shattered. The torch went out, plunging them into blackness. Ryker's scream was swallowed by the roar of falling stone. The mine shook, the ground buckling as beams cracked and walls caved in. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. Elias dropped to one knee, clutching the hammer's handle as the world collapsed around him. The ceiling groaned, breaking apart, showering him in gravel and ash. Somewhere beneath the noise, Ryker's body hit the ground with a final, hollow thud. For a moment, Elias could see Clara's face in the dust, the memory of her smile, her hand on his arm, the way she'd said, "Don't let them change you." He closed his eyes, his chest heaving, blood soaking his vest. The hammer felt weightless now, as though it belonged more to heaven than his hands. He whispered her name once more. Then the mountain fell. The blast echoed through the canyon for miles. Red Butte woke to it, doors swinging open, dogs barking, horses rearing in terror. The sky above the northern ridge flared with the glow of collapsing stone. And then silence. When dawn came, the mine mouth was sealed beneath a heap of rock and dust. No one dared go near it for days. They said the ground still trembled, as if the earth itself was trying to bury what it had seen. On the 5th morning, a small group of miners rode out with shovels and lanterns. They worked in silence, clearing rubble, listening for the faintest sound from below. What they found stopped them cold. Just at the entrance, half buried in dust, lay the hammer. Its head was cracked down the center, its handle blackened as if kissed by fire. The name Clara was still legible, etched deep into the steel, untouched by the ruin around it. There was no sign of Elias Boone. No body. No blood. Only that hammer, and the silence it carried. They brought it back to town, laying it on the anvil in the forge where it belonged. The place smelled faintly of smoke and river clay, as if something sacred had passed through. The sheriff stood over it, hat in hand, and said the only words that made sense. May God have mercy on whoever earned this. A week later, the townsfolk gathered by the cottonwood tree where Clara slept. They built a small statue, simple, carved from stone. It showed a hammer resting against a river rock, and beneath it, one line was chiseled, "For the ones who forged love and fire." After that, the forge was never used again. The building stood empty, the anvil rusting, the air thick with memory. But every now and then, travelers passing through would stop in Red Butte, drawn by stories. They'd ask about the blacksmith who hunted the devils that killed his bride, and the townsfolk would shake their heads. Some said he was buried beneath the mine. Others swore they'd seen him out on the ridge at dusk, standing beside his horse, the sun glinting off the scarred steel of his hammer. Years turned to decades, and the desert began to reclaim what man had built. The wind tore the roof off a saloon, the river dried to a trickle, and Red Butte faded to a memory. But those who camped near the old cottonwood swore that on certain nights, when the wind was low and the stars hung heavy, you could still hear it. A soft, rhythmic ringing. Not loud, not angry, just steady, like a man shaping something unseen, somewhere between the living and the dead. Some said it was the echo of justice unfinished. Others believed it was the sound of a soul refusing to rest. But the old ones, the few who still remembered the giant blacksmith and the woman who taught school by his forge, they said it was simpler than that. They said it was love, endless, stubborn, and unbroken, still working the anvil of eternity. And on those nights when the wind carried that distant metallic heartbeat, even the coyotes went quiet, as though the world itself paused to listen, because they all knew what Red Butte had learned long ago, when fire and grief and iron met beneath the cruel sky. They said a man's heart can be tempered only so many times before it cracks. They said you can bury a body, but not the truth that made it stand. And they said that when a good man's heart finally breaks, even God listens to the sound of his hammer.